Here's how I stay inspired to create more, spend less time distracted, and more time creating. I believe we're all creative. We're all creative in our own ways, so we have to work at it. And we have to figure out what parts of us that we need to cultivate and work on to really see that creativity come alive. First, I have a hobby. I try to make sure that I at least have one or two hobbies that I do not make money from and I never plan to make money from. And right now my hobby is baking bread, which I'm sure many of you learned how to make bread during quarantine. With baking bread, learning the ins and outs of it and the mechanics and the sciences and the nuances of temperature and the ingredients that I'm using has really shown me to take that same time and precision when I'm sewing and creating in other areas. And there's this thread that weaves through all of the things that I create, and it's because I'm working on a hobby and I'm able to shut down my work and focus on something that is merely for enjoyment and learning and growing in ways that I can't really quantify, but I can in the way that when I wake up the next morning, when I go to work, that hobby has fueled me to do my work better and to even think through my work in a different lens. So I really like to think of creativity like sourdough bread in the way of a sourdough bread is made from a sourdough starter, and a sourdough starter is just water and flour, and it's fed daily, and the bacterias in the air are feeding it where it's growing and doubling in size. And as I'm feeding it and day after day growing, the flavors are creating more depth and nuances, and it's going to yield a much better product the more I take care of it and the more that I feed my sourdough starter. But the thing is, every day I have to discard part of that starter. So I'm discarding the starter, and it can go on to be given to a friend for their own bread baking. It can go on to create another meal or another loaf of bread. Whatever it does, I am discarding part of the starter, and it seems like I'm just getting rid of it, but really, it's not only going on to live on, I'm discarding it, and I'm not just getting rid of it. So I think of creativity in the way of, it's not this pie that when you're out of pie, you don't have any more left. It is like a well that continues to grow and continues to provide sustenance. And I say that because creativity, the more that you feed it, the more that you work on it, the more that you give to others, the more it will be fed. And creativity isn't just something that dries up in you. Of course, there are times where you might not feel creative, but maybe that's because you need to take up a hobby. I love the idea that me creating and giving to this hobby is also creating more space within me to receive more ideas and to learn more and to grow in my craft. My next tip is to go out and be inspired. Don't just look to be inspired by Pinterest, because that can feel overwhelming and unachievable. So when I get out and get inspired, I take a notebook with me. And with this, I'm going to connect it to my tip of noticing. I think creativity, a big part of it is just noticing and being able to notice details. Just seeing the bark and the depth of it on a tree and the shape that it takes could inspire the next pattern design that you're making on a quilt. So when you take time to get outside, you're not confined to what you see every day. You're not confined to the things that other people are creating and getting overwhelmed by that. It's giving you a new perspective to see that when you get outside, you see these things that have lasted just throughout the years, and how there isn't a cap on the beauty and the creativity of what's outside. It's there. You just have to take notice of it. I have learned to start small and to not feel like I have to have all the right tools right away when I start something. I think when you dive into something and you feel like you have to have the best tools or the best gear and you have to look like a professional from the beginning, you are stifling your creativity. and you're putting a cap on something, because when you start small with limited tools, it's the prime opportunity for you to solve a problem and figure out a new way to do something. I believe we have a fear, because I also have this fear of being wrong and doing things the wrong way. But when we live out of that fear, it is stifling what's inside of us. And when that's stifled, then it's not the well that I spoke of earlier. It is quieted, and that creativity in you cannot come out when you are acting out of fear. So this is your permission to start small and to start with what you have and where you are. I believe that the right tools are so important, but if you put off starting until you have everything in order, then you have no room to grow and you have no room to see your creativity evolve. What's also possible is you might just be creating copies of what's already out there. So when you're limited in your smallness, you're really tapping into the greatness of what's inside of you and the uniqueness of what your perspective is. You're able to create something that's so original because it is who you are being expressed through this art and through this creativity. It's okay to revisit old projects and ask yourself how it could be better and then execute again. I think that's how you get better at things, is trying and then trying again. And that goes right along with being good at editing, which is paring down and removing the fluff and curating. I think we often think to be creative you have to add many layers, but maybe you're finding your true creativity when you add and then you edit. It looks unimpressive to someone else, but I think that the art that I'm most moved by is when someone has edited and pared down and it looks simple. And that is what I want to fill more of my life with, is that thought through and beautiful art. I'm going to talk about two things in one. First is to take time every day to practice a hobby. With that, I know it's easy to say I don't have time and to use that as an excuse, but the more we create excuses, the more our creativity is stifled. Whether that's 5 minutes of writing or 10 minutes of drawing or an hour of sewing, whatever it is, when you take time daily, it's compounding upon itself and that creativity is able to flow more freely. A big aha moment I had recently was I was creating this silly stop motion and it was fun. I was creating this thing and learning some new things, and I noticed this voice in my head that was singing, "You must be bored." And I realized this is something I've heard said to me that I've taken on and repeated to myself. That phrase, "you must be bored." You must be bored is something I heard a lot growing up when I wanted to spend my time drawing and making books out of construction paper more than what all the other kids were doing. I think this idea that you have to have a reason to create something is actually fear, and it's a lie of someone else's perspective, and you won't create great things out of fear, and you'll continue the cycle of creating what has already been when you're creating out of fear. And that lie of "you must be bored," or whatever the phrase is that you repeat in your head, and like I said earlier, it's different for everyone, but when you give in to that idea of I have to have a reason, I think it takes away from our creativity organically flowing through us, and it starts to put our creativity in a box of what's already been. When we try to put a reason to everything, I think it becomes stale, and that will actually dry up your creativity, and it will actually motivate you to stop creating and using your time towards your hobbies and the things that actually are spilling over into the people around you. Carve out inspiration breaks. So whether that's going on a walk or taking a nap, setting a 15-minute timer and writing, I recommend creating special rituals that help you fully embrace a moment, whether that is filling a pot of tea and lighting a candle and sitting in your favorite chair and cozying up with a blanket, setting the scene in this space to be inspired. And it may seem frivolous, but when you're kind of setting the tone and carving out this special time, you'll be surprised at how it just spills over and inspires so many other parts of your life. I hope this video inspired you to create more, and hopefully it gave you a few ideas on living a creative life. I would love to hear your thoughts, so you can comment below or tag me on Instagram and we can continue the conversation. So I'll see you next week with a new video.